This morning we have Karen Adler, who is an LCSW. Susan Adler has been a participant in this group when we were live. She's spoken for us before, and good morning, Barb, glad you're here too. And so was very kind to recommend her sister, Karen, to come and speak with us today. So let me tell you a little bit about Karen Adler. Karen is an LCSW, as I mentioned. She's a trauma-informed, body-centered psychotherapist with over 35 years of experience working with individuals, couples, LGBTQI adults and teens and families on issues of trauma, grief, stress, anxiety, depression, and life transitional changes. Along with her therapeutic practice, Karen offers supervision, always nice. If you find this helpful, you might want to reach out for some supervision, and consultation services, and holds self-reflection, spirituality, meditation workshops and retreats, as well as keynote addresses and seminars on stress relief, grief, and trauma. Karen provides conscious parenting services and conducts ceremonial celebration for milestone events. It's wonderful. So Karen, welcome today. We will tell folks more about you at the end, but welcome. So glad you're here. Thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. As you can see, it's a family thing, this work.
I know, this work is a family thing, indeed. So.
And I also understand this is the last seminar of the year, which is kind of good in a way, because we kind of placed it, or I wanted it to be around the holidays. And in the pandemic, you know, we're sort of been, I think we're catching on that we're not in a sprint, we're in a marathon. And I think we all need that energy to help us kind of wrap our bodies and minds around that idea. And the holiday season itself in a normal year is very stressful. You know, it's energy expending, energy depleting. There's lots of family stuff that comes up. There's lots of financial issues. You know, everything sort of gets magnified around the holidays. And then you wrap this 2-year pandemic around it. And it's just, I think everybody is just beyond flooded. So this is a real good time to kind of talk about ways in which to operate in our lives for the long term with energy, not depleting energy. And I think there's a really, there's a way to do it that I've found that really works. So yeah, so for me, you know, it's really been a very deep year of reflection. You know, fairly soon when it started, I realized I didn't know what I thought I knew. And I ended up doing a lot of like listening, not a lot of talking, just a lot of like collecting information, reading a lot, podcasts, just a lot of learning. And some of it, like, it made me feel sort of very just humbled and embarrassed a little bit. And some of it validated some things that I've been doing for 30 years that have sort of been on the margins. And all of a sudden, it's like, I don't know if you know the story of the 100th monkey, but there's like monkeys on an island, and they have potatoes, and one of them figures out, you know, that the sand on the potato should be washed off, and then it tastes better and it's saltier. And all of the monkeys do that until after the 100th monkey, the monkeys all over the land just start to jump on to this idea. And I feel like that's sort of what's happened with body-centered work, and that we can really only heal trauma through the body, because trauma is part of the body. And that's kind of what I'm going to talk about today. But there's two things I figured out through this whole thing, or I've really noticed, and that is that those who are able to sort of, or open to the idea of zooming out and understanding that there's something bigger than we are at work. There's some sort of system out there, whatever you want to call it. But even Jane Goodall, the primalologist, said, you know, that the great scientists, the great minds of our time have sort of gotten into this idea of what happened before the Big Bang, actually. What systems at work there? So there is some sort of order. And the people who really sort of can get into that idea, and most of my clients can, then they do better. They're just doing better in the pandemic, and they will do better. The other piece is this idea about this deep dive, is that the pandemic has sort of created this time in which we have nowhere to go. to release or to distract or to do other things that sort of worked for us, and even to not even get at some deep issues that we just don't want to get to. Like, you know, I've uncovered some eating disorders that might not have showed up because they're so sneaky. And that even though we've done deep work, it wasn't until the pandemic that it really got pronounced. There's all kinds of things. And so when we go inward, there is a vast landscape. And that is those two things that I've sort of figured out, is that people willing to see sort of this bigger picture, and people who are able now to go into this deeper place. I hear about people that are going into therapy and asking me for therapists that I never in a million years thought would ever do that. So it's sort of our time as therapists to sort of step up and step forward and do all the things we know and add to our tools. And that's kind of what I'm here to do today. You know, when I think about what's happening now, it brings me back to my life before I got into this. I had a dark night of the soul that sort of sent me on this transformational journey that got me into this, my own sort of body-centered work, self-acceptance work, where I was a client of it, and it sort of transformed my work. But before then, I worked in foster care with a lot of traumatized children for many, many years. And I used to tell the foster parents that in understanding these kids is that, imagine, and this is like us here, imagine that we're actually in person and I'm standing in front of you and I'm trying to teach you some really important things. And there's no roof over our head, and it's storming down and the winds are whipping. How much of what I'm trying to tell you are you going to be able to get? And I see that as our central nervous systems, and as we're with what was happening with foster children. And I think that's what's happening now for all of us, is that it's really tough to navigate life because our central nervous systems are on overload. And so in my sort of, the way I've kind of dealt with it really is through this sort of these various things that I'll tell you about, but basically body-centered to become available to energy. And what it looks like is, oops, no, I don't know how to, okay, there we go. I'll figure this out, is how a beacon operates. A beacon is sort of this endless source of light, and it stands there and it doesn't do a whole lot of activity. It isn't working and chasing. It's sort of just standing there, flowing light, flowing clarity. And so it requires us to be that, to really help people, instead of following people down rabbit holes. And so in my formula, and this is my formula, we each are going to have our formula in life, but my formula in my own work and my formula in really working with others is really sort of threefold. And you'll see as I talk today, and by the way, the content I have is well over the hour I have to speak. So I just want to say that I've decided to go quality versus quantity here. And so if we don't get to everything, just know that you got whatever nuggets you needed to give you the energy that you needed to kind of move forward. And I'm happy to, if it resonates for people, to come back and finish with quality the rest of it. So I'm not sure what we'll get to today, but I kind of want to, and if I'm talking too fast, someone signal me and I'll slow down, because I kind of get excited. But so my formula is that as we're going through all of this, is that we need sort of a perspective shift or a consciousness shift. And we'll work with that a little today, how to look at things differently than you have, letting go, if the pandemic has done nothing else, it's kind of let go of kind of how we thought things operated and what we thought truth was and what we thought all kinds of things are, they're not. And so, so to be willing to kind of shift your perspective. So I'm sort of asking you today to sort of put some of your preconceived notions and judgments, they'll be waiting for you on the way out, but just kind of put them to the side for now and sort of be open to different possibilities and to looking at things differently. The other is understanding and information. And so we'll kind of talk about the mechanism of stress and grief, compassion fatigue. I don't know how much we'll get into that, but just really understanding how it all works and how it works within the body. A lot of the answers are there. And so to really be able to download this information, some basic information of how the body works and how the brain works. And the last part is then the tools. And my lean And, I'm sure many of you are therapists and you have your toolbox. My toolbox, in a big way, it really includes a body-centered approach. And so I want to talk a little bit about fear. I think fear is sort of the greatest motivating force we have right now. And why is fear so great? It's because it's sort of wired in our biology for survival. And yet what fear can do is it can make us very small. I don't know if you watched The Handmaid's Tale. Don't watch it, at least right now, because it is like one trauma after another. It is the most traumatizing movie I've ever seen. But Margaret Atwood says that pain makes your world very small. And so does fear. And so, but it is through fear, it is through understanding, like if we, people who don't have amygdalas, like walk into dangerous situations without, so fear has a real purpose. It's very important, but we weren't really, and we were designed for that. It's just not for the long term, endlessly for years on end, nonstop. We're not designed for that. So we need to learn to work with fear and to transform fear, because when we do, we actually can become that beacon, and we can actually then access all of the energy that wants to come into us to get us through everything we need to get through. So I'm going to scare you for a second, and I'm going to have you, like, just for a minute, like, I hope people aren't driving. If you are, okay, just be careful. But it's better if your phones are off and you're sort of very present to this, because a little of today is going to be some experiential stuff, and I think it's important, and I want you to participate in it. But if you think about what your worst fears are in the pandemic, your most catastrophic fear, I'll share one of mine that I think has gone through everyone's heads and is in the movies and in the news, and you can't help to go there from time to time. But feel your body as I say this word, apocalypse. Okay, and I'm going to give you the definition of apocalypse. Okay, it's a Greek root, it's verb. Oh, see, now the problem with seeing the three of you is it covers some of the thing. That's okay, I have it here. There's a verb meaning to uncover, reveal, lay bare, or disclose.
Karen, you can minimize Chris's picture and my picture.
All right, well,
we don't want to cover your stuff.
All right, how do I do that without covering? Okay, all right, we'll try that. Okay, that works. So you can see, when you think about, is that so scary? And if you think about what's happening right now, we are in a time of a lot being revealed. A lot of the ills of the society that we have been covered are now revealed. So really, that's kind of what the pandemic is doing. I'm going to put you guys back because I like to see people. It's okay. All right. So, fear divides us. But if we sort of understand, and this is kind of along the lines of a perspective shift, is to kind of look at all of this a little bit differently. Michael Hoff, he's a post-apocalyptic author. And yeah, it's covered again. Here we go. Let's do, oh, now it's really covered. Huh. Okay. Hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. So that's basically his vision and his message in his shows about, in his movies, about kind of the cycle of history. And, if you look at nature kind of tells us, hold on a second, what's true. And so I look at childbirth as one of the great metaphors of everything. And that really is that we go through these constrictions, right? We go through, when we have a baby, right? We go through a constriction, and then the greatest miracle of all happens, right? The thing that it's the kind of proof that there's more, is that something that all of a sudden your heart is born, right? And so that's really kind of what we're in right now. We're in a constriction, and out of a constriction will come something amazing. Okay, and how do we know something's true? We know it's true because it's true for everything. So that's why we look at nature, that all pain ultimately grows us if we let it. Even the worst pain, it does grow us if we let it, because when we experience fear, pain, we have two choices: to constrict, which some of us do, or expand. And our work is really to help people expand or soften to it. So let's look at the great constrictions in the world that have happened, the pandemics in history. Okay, the bubonic plague, right? That killed millions of people. And out of it came, the public health authority. If you look at the Spanish flu, patient care it was advanced, vaccines, epidemiology, all of this came out of pandemics. Great pandemic protective gear. The wood beds became metal beds for sanitation, water systems, bathrooms that were separate from, in separate living quarters for sanitation, crinoline dresses, those were for social distancing. Art, great art, all kinds of cultural changes, social justice, all kinds of things have come out of pandemics. And so right now, we're in one. We're in COVID, and it doesn't seem like it's ever going to end, and yet it will. And a lot of the same kinds of things will be learned from this, but new things will be learned from this, because we're in such different times now. We have different things with isolation here, and yet we have social media. So news travels fast, fear travels fast. We have this sort of polarization, trusted institutions, that we have, like the police, right? Government, science is being questioned, right? There's all kinds of different unique pressures right now in COVID. And yet you can also already see some of the science that's coming out of it, some of the issues that we haven't been able to deal with being dealt with, in the Me Too movement, and all kinds of things are happening. And so we're not on the outside of that yet. We're still in it. And it still even seems to be intensifying in many ways. And yet, if you look through history, all of the many pandemics that we've had, all these constrictions have always brought us farther and advanced us. So I think that perspective shift and how we look at it really does help us see that this too shall pass, like all other crises. And yes, there's a lot of chaos, and there's a lot of loss, and there's a lot of grief, and all kinds of things we have to work through. And also there is a greatness that's come out of it, and that is sort of the nature of life. Okay, so stress, the word stress came out of intense times, right? It came out of between the Great Depression and World War II. The rise of Hitler was happening then. Europe was in great confusion. And so people were under incredible stress at the time. And this man, Hans Selye, he defined stress as the non-specific response of the body to a demand for change. And so right then we see, although, psychoanalysis and stuff went right to the mind to deal with stuff, it's been a bodily thing from the beginning. Wilhelm Reich, he's kind of the father of body-centered work. He kind of came out of this time. He was one of Freud's students, and he was really considered out there, radical. And he talked about sexual impulses in the body and sort of how we create character structures around our energy in our body, which is the therapy I do, which is sort of the basis for it, and it is sort of built upon that. But he grew out of that time. So this has been understood for quite a long time. And kind of here's the way I see stress. There's pressure. I tell this to students a lot, when I'm going to high schools and everything. I'm like, pressure is life. Life, it's not like, people go, when that's over, I'm going to be fine. Oh, when that's over, then I can relax. Well, actually, life is pressure. And there's usually one thing after another, even the good things. The college you're trying to get into, whatever you're trying, there's always going to be pressure. So we're not going to be able to get rid of pressure, but stress is really how we receive pressure. And trauma is like beyond that. We're flooded, and our nervous system is flooded. But I like to look at it like, we're a vessel, and our bodies hold the history of everything that's ever happened to us, right? And emotions are energy, right? Emotions scientifically, you know, and if emotions don't disappear. So if emotions are energy and energy doesn't disappear, so where does it go when something happens to us that we don't express? When we don't get to say how we feel about something, or we're paralyzed by something and aren't able to move it from our bodies, what happens to it? It ends up going into our body. It ends up creating these holdings in our bodies, right? And we become sort of tight inside because they have one after another, layer upon layer of these held emotions, right? That build upon one another, and it creates a tightness like a tight rubber band, right? So that when something happens to kind of be that last straw, right? It's like, bing, we kind of lose it, right? Because we're very tight inside. I often, you know, if you have a napkin or a tissue by you, I often look at it like this. When a client comes to me, you know, or anyone comes to me, you know, we're born pretty much clean, unless you believe in past lives or things that happened in the womb. For the most part, we're pretty clean. If I don't know if you could see this, but so I'll leave that little crease to be something that might have happened in utero or whatever you want to believe, right? And then we have something that might happen at the age of 8 that we didn't get to express or work through, right? So it creates sort of a fold in our personality, right? And then something else happens to us. Someone dies in the family, there's a loss like this, then there might even be sort of a humiliation or bullying or something happens. So things happen throughout our life, you know, a divorce, all kinds of things happen to us. And if we don't really work it through properly, it creates these sort of folds in our personality. And so the work is to sort of go inward and explore and excavate out all of those held emotions that have built up, you know, and have been held in time, right? They don't go anywhere. They're staying at the age of 8, at the age of 3, at the age of, they're there. So until we kind of go in and move them, and so as we do that, then what ends up happening is we end up being able to transform them out when we can address them. But what you can see is some of them will completely transform and go away. And some of them will be sort of tendencies. You know, my tendency is to worry because of my history. What my traumas is that I have a tendency to worry. I've done a lot of work on it, but it is a bit of a fold. And so when something happens out of my control, there's my worry. And so my clients will say, sorry, they'll say to me, Karen, I'm in a fold, you know, and we'll have to, okay, let's get to work, and we're going to work on that fold. And some things will transform out. So so the idea is to create resilience. So when we transform those things out, when we move that out, what ends up happening is what we create is an inner flexibility. We want to be like this, not like the rubber band, but sort of here, right? And let's add in perspective shifts, right? So we're kind of more flexible and open. So we feel better inside, and actually we're more open to things. So these perspective changes about perhaps spirituality or something bigger than us, or bringing meaning into something that negative that's happened, it kind of grows our vessel, right? And then what? We're more available to more light, right? So the idea is we want to be available to those energies that want to come in and assist us. We want to be available to it. And the bigger we are, the more energy we can fill. So if you're tight and small like a thimble, that's about how much you can carry. So anything over that is kind of going to stress you out. So the idea is to continue to be almost like an oak tree that's solid and rooted and sort of just sways. You're affected. You're affected by things, but it doesn't break you. And it often makes you stronger because you can handle it. You can grow with it, you can change with it. Okay.
Just a quick comment here. From Laura says, my huge fear, and I think a lot of others, is climate change, and that's not going to pass. How do we manage that?
Well, that's a fact out there, you know, and I think what the idea is to work with the fear and to work with sort of your internal, because yes, there's a lot of things that can happen and will happen, but the idea is like, what am I going to constrict, or am I going to be able to be, you know, the way I look at it for myself, because, you know, I remember watching the Titanic, and the Titanic was going down and that guy jumps off the boat and into the women's boat to float. And that always struck with me that's, you know, because I was a very fearful person. And I'm like, I don't want to be that guy. I want to be a warrior standing there in the end. And whatever happens, I know there's a bigger picture. I know there's more than this. And so I'm going to stand in the front and I'm going to do what I can. Anne Lamott talks about, you know, moving forward, like with headlights. Like, so that's how far you go as far as the headlights can see. You don't go farther into the catastrophic fantasy about what could happen that you can't really do anything about, right? You can do your part and you have to work on your part, but you can't do anything about what other people are going to do. So you do what you can do, what's in your vision, you know, ahead. And so you take care of that, and that's manageable. That you can do your part, but to live in the fear of the worst thing that can happen, that can create a constriction in you that's not going to allow you to navigate. So the idea is how to navigate the world we're in now. And presence, we're going to talk about a lot of things that can help with that, but I don't know if that helps with with your question, but you know, that's why I put apocalypse out there, because I think we're all like a little bit afraid of the end of this planet or whatever. And so my thing is, you know, I don't know, but I do know what I can do to feel better and to grow and to be part of life right here and right now and to make my life meaningful. That I can do. If there's a follow-up to that.
Bruce said that helps. And Melinda had said that your example was excellent.
Okay. Thank you. So stress. You know, as people, I'm sure you can just kind of read through that list. I'm not going to go through all of them, but as therapists, you know, we're sort of the go-to people. I know that I always was. And I know that when I needed help, when I was vulnerable and scared and, you know, hit my dark night of the soul, I sort of hid because I didn't want to, I was ashamed. I didn't want people to see me as weak. I didn't want people to see me as not being the person, you know, I didn't want to be seen as a person who needs help. And so sometimes we don't even listen to our own signals, which I know I didn't. I had to completely break down and before I really got that. But, you know, we really have to kind of even write it down if you're here, like how does the stress of life show up for you? What does that look like? For me, it was a lot of worrying and anxiety and somaticizing. I ended up with an autoimmune, you know, and that's really about not expressing myself. It's about holding it in my throat. And so it kind of can show up as physical symptoms. Some people are just angry all the time. That's what I see in this pandemic. I see a lot of angry people. And all I can say is, trauma, you know, they need to work. They need to work. If we all worked, we wouldn't be in this divided position that we're in. And so, you know, just look at how, you know, all of these symptoms are really just alarm systems for us to kind of deal with our stuff. So each person, I don't know if you've seen this little graph here, it's done by Pat Ogden. These are all sort of body-centered kinds of approaches about with trauma and body trauma. But I always look at emotions like 3-year-olds. And if you try to talk to a 3-year-old that's having a tantrum, try to talk to a teenager that's having a tantrum, try to talk to a spouse that's having a tantrum, right? It's really, it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't help. And it's actually re-traumatizing if we're trying to even work with our clients when they are outside the window of tolerance, right? So I look at stress as sort of, you know, within the lines, right? It can be within the lines. It's stressful, but you're able to manage it. When it goes outside, your central nervous system is becoming flooded. And that's where anxiety, panic, hypervigilance comes into place, or you become depressed and you shut down, you dissociate, you become numb, you become depressed and, you know, despondent. And so these are the kinds of things we have to understand, is that when our system is dysregulated, we cannot really work with that. And so it's so important to, when we're working with people and we're working with ourselves, we need a regulated system.
Erin, we have a quick question. Is this a good moment?
Sure. I might be getting to it, but go ahead.
Okay.
If I'm getting to it, I'll answer it when we get to it.
Okay. This is from Allison. I know there's emerging research about migraines being listed as a symptom of PTSD. Do you know anything about that?
It may be. I mean, I come from a little bit of a different approach, and I look at it as anger. So when I'm working with someone, I'll probably work with their anger, but there's all kinds of other, I'm sort of open to all of it and whatever works to help, to work with the migraine. But that may be the first place I go, is kind of finding where the anger is in the life and history, and kind of working through the body with that. Is that okay? I'm just going to go on. Okay. So this is Peter.
Thank you.
Peter Levine. He created the somatic experiencing. While trauma can be hell on earth, trauma resolved is a gift of the gods, a heroic journey that belongs to each of us. That's why we love movies and hero stories, because we're meant to win in the end. We're meant to be the heroes of our own story. Because when we experience trauma, it's really our body telling us it wants to finish something. It wants to have a happy ending. It just wants to move. Emotions just want to move. And so trauma wants to move out. And so it wants to be resolved. And so it shows up in all kinds of ways, calling us to finish our hero story. Okay. So let's kind of get into, understanding sort of the mechanism of the brain. I don't want to go into too much detail because there's a certain part of it that's super important. But I want to, we want to talk about how the stress response with the brain, it's called the triune brain. It's a 3-brain system. It's sort of the simple way of putting it. It's sort of like an upside down triangle in terms of evolution. So we started with the reptilian brain, and then the mammal brain, or the limbic system, and then there's the cortex, the neocortex, right? So that's the human brain, right? So the reptilian brain and the mammalian brain is really all about, the reptilian really is just about fight, flight, freeze. It's just about survival and discharge. Fight, flight, freeze, discharge. There's also fight, fawn. There's kind of other parts of how we survive. The mammalian brain is really sort of about herds and finding, connection with other creatures for protection, right? And then the human brain is really the intellect and consciousness, and allows us to sort of rise above all of that, which is why we kind of survived in the jungle, because we're so smart. And yet it was a confusing place to be, because we're both predator and prey. And because of our higher minds and thinking and memory and all that, we could sort of put ourselves in bad situations. But because of the times, primordial time, they could move their bodies. And so they could move the trauma out. So what happens is, and what creates difficulty is that humans, when we go into the freeze state of it, fight, flight, freeze, which I'm going to kind of show you a demonstration of that, right? We have the ability, unlike other animals, to adapt around that freeze and still operate. And so when we're uncomfortable with something, we may distract ourselves. We may get really good in school, right? I have a lot of unhappy doctors and lawyers and people who are really able to achieve, and our culture sort of supports that. Our culture supports achievement. And so we can kind of move around the signals of our body that are trying to ask us to complete these held emotions, and we adapt around it, and we are still able to sort of function until it all breaks down, and you end up in my office or somewhere in the hospital or somewhere where it all breaks down, which it ultimately does. Okay. So I'm going to show you what it looks like, this fight, flight, freeze in the wild. If you are an animal lover, it's going to, well, first of all, watch your bodies, listen to your bodies while you're watching this. But also, I just want to tell you that it's got a happy ending on this one. But I just wanted to give you a little warning on this. So it's very quiet, but you'll see it. It's kind of a little bit of a long sequence. So really kind of watch your body as you're watching the sequence, and we'll talk about it. I might talk a little bit through it, but okay. So here we have an impala. Okay, it's a kind of deer. Right. You see that leopard has got him, and he's collapsed into what is called the freeze state. So he cannot fight, he could not flight, so he froze, and he looks like he's dead, right? His eyes are open, he's completely still. And then there's a hyena, another predator that comes upon the leopard. The leopard's just ready to bite in. Right, and the hyena chases it away. Watch your bodies as you're watching all of this, by the way. You see the deep breath. Now, that is the thawing of the freeze stage. See that body shaking and shaking and shaking. We've experienced that as adrenaline in our bodies. And then it jumps up as if nothing happened, trauma gone. Check with your bodies real quick and see what you're experiencing after watching that. Some people have a pretty strong reaction to it. So the freeze response, okay, this is where the answers are to healing trauma and creating space for energy to come in. These are where our blockages are. And we have reasons, you know, the freeze state really is there for survival. It looks, you heard of possum, you know, creates this appearance of death because predators generally will not kill an already dead animal. So it's like one last ditch effort for survival. And the other is that it creates the preparation for death by neurotransmitters secreting serotonin and dopamine and other things that create a numbing so that when the animal's being torn from limb to limb, they don't feel it. And so you can imagine that when we are when we're traumatized and we are in the freeze state, we seek out things that help to numb us and to make us feel so that we don't have to feel the pain, right? So, but the key is immobilizing the trauma, which is why you have to be super careful with it. And this is for me and all of you, feeling the need to be busy all the time is a trauma response and a fear-based distraction from what you'd be forced to acknowledge and feel if you slow down. That's one way it shows up. If not dealing with your stuff is getting real busy. So this, what's required to really work with moving the freeze state or the thawing is really to settle the body. And just like a 3-year-old, I love the 3-year-old analogies, but just like a 3-year-old needs a safe environment, a child needs a safe environment to thrive, so too do our emotions to come up and move. It needs to be safe, so our bodies need to be safe. The people we work with need to work with a therapist who has a settled body. Children need settled parents to feel safe. And so from this place of a settled body, healing can happen. It's not necessarily the healing place, although I think it can heal a lot just to be in a settled place, just to have your body calm and grounded. But this is where then we can begin to take more of a deep dive and explore. But we don't want to work with people who are not settled, because that could be re-traumatizing. And that's a real key in body work. I spend a lot of time settling people's bodies. And that's what this may be the most important thing we do today. And I hope that you're in a position where you can do this. But I want to do a little settling meditation. It's very similar. Mine lasts usually with clients about 10 minutes or so. before we start getting into the body work. I'll try to keep it short so that you can kind of experience it and do your version of it with your clients or even with loved ones, right, to kind of get their body settled. But if you guys are willing, I'd like to do a little settling meditation. Okay, so maybe just kind of, you can either sit up and, have your backs up on your chair, your butt and everything uncrossed, or you can lay down on the floor with your knees up and close your eyes. Either way is just fine. Feel your feet first and just kind of wiggle your toes and bring the direction of your attention to your feet. Energy follows attention. So if you just feel your feet, your energy might all of a sudden just sort of soften. And just kind of hear the sounds of the room. Just imagine something in life. I may have asked you to look before you closed your eyes, but imagine something in life that sort of makes you feel calm and safe, and just sort of picture it for a moment. And then become aware of your breath, your natural breath when you breathe in and when you breathe out. Where does it go in your body? You may notice it's shallow, you may notice it's deep. And then start to elongate the exhale just a little bit longer than the exhale, a normal inhale and a nice long exhale. All the way as if it's going to the bottom of your feet, and just hold it just a little longer at the end. And feel as if your body's softening with each breath. You may start to notice sensations in your body. And then kind of imagine that there's a white light that's kind of filtering into the very crown of your head. It's kind of in the soft spot in a baby, very crown of your head. Just kind of with your imagination, imagine that the white light is kind of entering, and its job is to sort of soften everything it touches. So as it comes into your forehead and your mind, your thoughts start to kind of become a little bit untangled, become a little more like vapor. And sort of float away like a cloud and leaving sort of just a blank space of light. Feel the space between your eyes, between your temples. Using that nice long breath to draw the light down through your cheeks and your jaw. Just feel a release the back of your neck, down your throat, opening up your throat and feeling your shoulders release as it goes down your shoulders and down your arms, all the way to the tips of your fingers. Allow that light to move from your throat into your heart space, and really allow your heart to sort of step forward as the light fills in the chest cavity, even beyond the borders of the chest cavity and into your back, space between your shoulder blades. Moving down your spine, into your lower back, into your diaphragm. Softening there. As you allow that light to move down then into your belly. And just as you bring attention to it, imagine that the light is filling that area, softening it, moving down through your hips, your whole intestinal area, and your whole pelvic region, glutes, the lowest part of your spine and down your thighs. Through your knees, your calves, your ankles, and then really allowing that nice long breath to go into your feet and feel your toes spreading out and your feet kind of push a little bit into the earth as you allow that light to move through your feet into the earth, like roots of light. And as they grow deep and wide and long, you can breathe in and feel almost like the nutrients of the earth coming into your body, sort of mingling with that light. And just experiencing softening in your body as all these elements, the air of your breath, the water and nutrients of the earth, light, all coming together to soften your body in service of your healing. And just kind of take a minute to notice what you're experiencing in your body, what sort of wakes up a little bit in your body. And kind of take one more nice long breath. Feel your body supported. We'll count back from 5 and we'll open our eyes. So 5, feel the support of the earth. 4, feel your breath. 3, hear the sounds of the room. 2, you can let your mind go wherever it wants to go. And 1, open your eyes. Notice how you feel. Some of you may feel calmer or settled, and some may feel some things going on in there. And it's just your body talking. But if there's any comments or questions, I hope that you use that or something like that. It could be much briefer, but I think it's worth it to spend time with it.
Oh, it was lovely. Thank you. We do have one question. Could the animal example also be used for a healing intervention as first taking a deep breath and moving the body?
First taking a deep breath and what?
Moving the body.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the energy wants to move in any way that we can get it to move. You know, I know there's some great sort of yoga practices and body movement and all that stuff, everything. Just you want to keep things moving. But you know, the most important thing is that you're listening to the body. So you're able to sort of locate where you're feeling the blockage so that there's a tension to it. Because we can do a lot of things to make ourselves feel better, but it doesn't sustain if we don't really move the blockage. So, yeah. So I think Resma Menachem, I don't know if you know who he is, but he wrote a book called My Grandmother's Hands. I felt like that was the most important book I have read throughout this whole pandemic. And he really talks about racialized trauma, the brown body, the white body, the blue body, and how history has created these traumas that have been passed down and how it's kind of led us to where we are now. But he really talks about this nerve, because that's really what we were activating here when we settled the body, was the vagus nerve. It's really polyvagal theory. And this idea that there's this nerve in our body that it reaches from our throat and our lungs, our heart, our stomach, our liver, and throughout our entire body, but it really settles in the gut. So, when we feel fear in our gut, or we feel intuition, or all those things, that's really our vagus nerve. And so when we calm our vagus nerve, we're not just, calming our body, but we're activating the vagus nerves. Also makes us feel connected to others too. So I'm aware that, in my life, that I could have everything. And when I was tight, when I was going through whatever I was going through, I was alone. I felt alone. And so when you are able to actually work with the body and calm it, It doesn't matter if you're alone or you're with a group of people, you don't feel alone, you feel connected. And that is sort of that greater, that's why Resmaa Menakem calls it the soul nerve, because it really sort of touches into something that's sort of inexplicable, but it has to do with that connection to something outside of ourselves. Okay, so now I want to kind of go into the sort of the deep dive of sort of what I'm about, really, in terms of how I operate in working with the body. There's many different ways. There's somatic experiencing, there's focusing, there's NARM, there's Hakomi, there's all kinds of other modalities out there. And this is the one that I was introduced to 35 years ago, and it sort of transformed my life and became more and more the modality that I use. And it was developed by a man, he's an ex-priest named Dick Onley, and his protege, Cherie McCoy, sort of took various modalities. It was kind of in the humanist movement, you know, or kind of counterculture rebellion against traditional psychoanalysis, and really kind of went to this place, I believe it was called Heritage House, where some of the greats like Virginia Satir, Fritz Perls used to do, you know, trainings, and they were sort of trained under him. And he also was into shamanism and Native American teaching and Eastern philosophies. And he kind of took all of what he learned and pulled it together into what is called self-acceptance training, which is basically the definition. And to me, this is the path to being available to all the energy that we need to kind of get through anything. And it's the experience. It's not like looking in the mirror and saying, I love myself. It's far from that. It's an experience of who we are in any given moment without self-criticism, self-evaluation, self-judgment, or, key here, effort to change. Okay, the experience, it's the experience of who we are in any moment without self-criticism, self-evaluation, self-judgment, or effort to change. Sometimes it's in the trying to change and all of the judgments that we have around our bodies, what we're feeling, who we are, that hold things in place. And so when we allow them to be what is, and I spend most of my time just sort of underlining what is, it's kind of like that 3-year-old again who wants your attention, and you're pushing them away or trying to tell them something or solve something, instead of just kind of kneeling down, looking them in the eyes and saying, I'm listening to you. I'm listening to you. And then you're just sort of acknowledging, accepting, and then they move on. Then they stop bothering you. And you also then, as a side effect, have a better relationship. And that's sort of how it works with the body. And then we do hold the history of our lives within the cells of our body. And so we want to listen to the story of the body. The intellect can change the story and distort the story. The mind actually is accurate. And that's why I like speaking from the body. And I'm going to go through these quickly, just because this is not a whole thing on self-acceptance. This is really sort of my way of working with the body. But it does involve an integration of various tools, which I sort of mentioned: meditation, contemplation, hypnosis, intuition, introspection and awareness, bioenergetics, which is, you know, the Wilhelm Reich stuff, and Gestalt techniques. So Alexander Lowen took Wilhelm Reich's work, and he was a student of him, and he sort of worked with it and advanced it more, made it a little more mainstream. And I'm not going to go into these too much. I just want to say that we create personalities around where we hold things in our body, which is why it's kind of important to know, like I tend to hold things in my heart and my throat. And so we create these personality structures depending on where things happened in our life. So there's, and Lowen spoke of them as like schizoid, oral, psychopath, and it was more of a negative. And so Dick Onley sort of changed it to a more positive, because his idea was to embrace, these are like your teddy bears that got you and helped you survive through life. So you want to embrace them. And when you can embrace them and say, that's okay, you know, that's okay. You're holding your teddy bear, you know, of pushing me away, you know, that's okay. Let's just bring it out so that we can see it. And when you allow it to be and say, let's do this, you're doing this and this, then they feel free, then change can happen. Okay, that there's going to be a lot of questions about that, and it's a whole nother thing, but I just wanted you to kind of understand, Michael Siegel in Untethered Soul calls it like the thorn, how we have this thorn and we don't want to pull, don't want to touch the thorn. So we just adapt around the thorn our whole life. And that's really kind of what these structures have done, but it helps you survive. And then Gestalt, when I'm working with someone, we go into the body and we talk to. So if it brings up, let's say, in the heart, there's often grief, and we want to talk to the person, not about them, because when you talk about, you're going back into your mind and you're operating from the intellect. And it's not that feelings aren't accessed, but it's more raw, and you're kind of getting to that point in time where it's frozen and you're able to talk to. And so it can be very, very powerful in moving energy. And remember, the idea is really not, it's more about moving energy than anything else. Right. So it almost doesn't matter what you say. You can say there's a lot of truths and a lot of insights and a lot of amazing things that come out of it, but that's not the point. The point is really to move the trauma. I hope that makes sense. Right. I don't want to get too behind the night. What time do we have here? All right. So I'm not going to do this exercise for time's sake, because you already did, in the settling the body. And I was asking you to sort of be aware of the stirrings in your body. And some of you may have, and some of you may just felt calm and enjoyed that. That's fine. But if you can sort of think about it and even jot down where you noticed sensations in your body, because it's sort of an indicator in the body of where you tend to hold your emotions. And this is the most basic that I can give you of where we tend to hold things. That's why when someone mentioned the migraine, I was talking about anger, because often that's where I'll kind of start. And it may turn into grief, and it may turn into sadness, so all of these things, but that may be sort of, it's kind of a guide to where an entry point is, like where's the anger, where's the sadness. The throat, I said, for me was a whole goiter had developed from me not being able to express myself. And that's what sort of forced me into this body work, where then I learned to be able to express myself fully. So it was sort of an indicator of where I hold things. The heart is often about grief and loss and longing. And so it's not rocket science, it's kind of obvious, but that's kind of where we, when you have a lot of people have a heavy heart, particularly in this pandemic, there's been so much loss, and they may be, when we get to grief, if we get to grief, that kind of is an indicator of where in the sort of the grief process you are. If you're in anger or depression or sadness, these are all sort of moving emotions, and we want to kind of allow that to be expressed. Fear is in the belly, struggle is in the diaphragm, obviously sexuality, and then survival sort of is in the lowest part of the spine there, that lower area. Okay, and in the hands and the arms, the hands are the work organs of the heart. The heart is the arms are connected to the heart. So I often do have people reach or hold things or whatever to kind of access the heart. And the feet is usually about grounding. Very simple. Okay. So let's talk about some tools. Okay, we're even going to get to tools. That's great. Okay, so one of the tools I've sort of touched upon is the sort of bigger picture idea. Don't get too caught up in the details of it. It's a little chaotic looking, but the idea that there is energy, there's an essence in us that is actually very calm. And when I have people do work at the end, often, not all the time, but often they'll feel a sense of tingling calm or peace. And that is really the connection that we're looking for in terms of this greater energy, this greater force out there that actually is in service of us. So we begin to look at life instead of based on these sort of limited ideas and our thoughts and fears and what's going to happen to me and you did this to me and all this stuff. You're able to kind of stand sort of in your own calm and energy by speaking your truth and then seeing what's after that. You hurt my feelings, that you're talking, and then what do you feel in your body? Well, I feel a little lighter. Okay, stay with that, right? And then you'll kind of notice sort of a lightness come over you. And that is where that place of feeling connected and not alone in your own fear, but or whatever the emotion is, right? But you feel more connected to other people. And so it's sort of this bigger picture thing that brings upon then, sort of drops your sense of, oh, I kind of want to know what I want to do with my life, oh, I see the meaning of why this happened. Oh, that, there's something bigger out there for me. And it sort of gives you energy and inspiration. And there's another book I want to recommend called Aware by Daniel Siegel, and he describes it. I loved his analogy, and he actually gives some good exercises in there for you. But this idea that our awareness is kind of like a wheel. So we have this hub in the center, which is this knowing that I just described to you. And then in the outer rim are all sort of our five senses things, the things that happen to us, the things, the emotions and all the things I just kind of talked about, what people do to us, our body sensations, the emotions and fears. And so then there's the spoke, which is like how we bring the knowing into the known. These are the knowns in the outer circle, right? And then the knowing is in the inner circle, which is that expansive place of our essence. And so when you're in a situation, I'll give you a good example because it just happened where I had to have an MRI for a shoulder that I ignored, right? And I don't know if anyone has had an MRI, but oh my gosh, it's like putting you in a drum. It's like if you're claustrophobic, which I am a little bit, it's kind of like, wow, aren't we more advanced than this? It's really kind of this weird. So they put you in there and there's this drumming, there's this hitting, like people are around it banging, and it's doing whatever it's doing to do it. But I knew what I was going into, and I was kind of scared of it. And they let you wear earphones, but it gets drowned out by the banging. But I asked for Stevie Wonder because I consider him to be the most optimistic human on the earth. And what I ended up doing was I ended up laying there and feeling my feet, wiggling my toes, and imagining Stevie Wonder singing to me and that I'm dancing. And I imagined sort of that I was also in a universe. So I was expanding my consciousness in this sort of limited space where I could have attached to the fear. And I had to be in there for 45 minutes. And it went like that. And that's bringing the knowing into the known. I hope that makes sense. But I highly recommend that book because he really goes into detail about how the mind works and all that stuff. So are some really practical ones. Some of them are going to seem real simple, but they're actually magic. And this is one of my favorites. And it's really this idea of restriction or pausing. And so it's like not indulging a thought, right? Or not sending that text you want to text, or getting angry in that moment, right? And just doing that impulse to scream at somebody, right? That holding back, it's not suppression. It can be suppression, which is how we get blockages, right? Or it can be this magic place of metabolizing the emotion and transforming it into something else. It is a very magical thing. And it looks kind of like this. If you think about how a light bulb works, there's a positive and then there's a negative charge, right? And if the positive goes directly into the negative, it's going to short circuit. That's like anger, let's say, right? Where you get in a fight with somebody and explodes, right? The filament is actually the resistor in a bulb, right? So if it's a 40-watt bulb, that's how much light you get, right? Because it goes through the resistance and it glows the light, right? But the higher the wattage, so a 100-watt bulb is going to be brighter than a 40-watt bulb, right? So the resistance is more. So like I said, things that work in these metaphors are really true for everything. So when you can resist that emotion that thing you want to go for, if you can resist it and allow it to metabolize, not only are you like dissipating it, but you're actually, as a side effect, creating what I call miracles, which are unexpected things that happen that seem unrelated. This is again that zoom out of that bigger picture thinking. So when we can transform our pain, we grow from it and we create something, so let's say you're about to get in a fight with your partner, and you restrict and you stop it and you create. This has actually happened to me where I was going to get in a fight with my husband, and we both stopped and we sat down and did something else and just sat with the discomfort for a while. And we got a call later that his mother had a clear scan. You know, it's kind of works like that. It's like you're, you know, like, and when I'm working with my clients, I'm like, let's make a miracle. You know, let's work with this instead of like going to the pain and saying, oh my God, this is the worst thing that ever happened. It's like, no, this is a generator. We have a generator here. Like, what are we going to do to generate a miracle? They love that stuff. Not all of them, but most of them do. They're on board. Okay. Grounding, you know, we did it in the settling exercise, which is something that you can do immediately, and immediately lowers your energy. You know, it immediately sends your energy down. So it's kind of the first thing that you can do, and because you can do it quickly. Okay, and then automatically your breath will start to go down. It just kind of happens. You can't sort of be in your head and be in your feet at the same time. And I had a client who was having a panic attack, and he called me from a college campus. And the first thing I had him do was to sit on a bench. It was in the summer, and take his socks off and feel his feet on the grass. And it immediately sort of brought his energy down. Then we began to work with the breath. And these are 3 kinds of breath. You know, there's the anxious breath, and I always considered myself a non-breather. You don't know you are until you really pay attention to it. But it was kind of like I was in my head so much that I'm sort of spiking it, and that can sort of set off anxiety attacks and panic attacks and stuff like that. So you wonder where those come from. It really comes from you constantly hyperventilating and not knowing you're doing it. Then there's the neurotic breath, which is sort of people who are sort of always anxious, right? But you're really like high breath. You know, maybe a thought got you there, and you're kind of holding your breath, and then, right? And so it's kind of a long-term thing. And then there's the grounding breath, which is the healthy breath, which is long and low. You know, you notice I say that a lot, long and low and all the way down to your feet. And you can even hold it at the end. And that's kind of sort of the antidote, the cure for anxiety, is to really watch your breath. Another book that I've been reading so many books is called Breath, by James Nestor. And he really talks about the healing power of breath. And he said that a healthy breath, which was sort of, I've tried it, it's just like, wow, is 5.5 seconds exhale and 5.5 inhale. Exhale, try that. It slows your breath. It's less breaths. But anyway, that's kind of beside the point. I am interested in helping people to kind of lower their breath and make it, and it really sort of helps to settle the body down. Okay.
Fabulous information, Karen. We have about 5 minutes before our formal Q&A time.
Okay. So let's see. Creating space, that's just sort of becoming present, okay, when we realize that we're not our thoughts, but we're really the observer of our thoughts. So it's this idea of really creating this, like, in every moment, you know, what am I doing right now, and how can I work with myself right now? It's sort of another miracle space. Okay, so that's another where you're not indulging your thoughts or judgments or anything future thinking or past thinking. You're really in the present moment. And then you're able to sort of come into your sensations. Okay, and here's the sort of, I kind of alluded to it, but you know, when you're in the moment and something's happening, this is something you can do. Even if you're triggered by a client or you're triggered by something in the holidays or whatever, you can immediately, before you just react, like hit that pause button, which creates that space. Feel your feet, let your breath lower, and notice your sensations. Even before I did this, I sat and I began to just feel my emotions, all the tingling everywhere. And it just helped settle my body down. And then watch your judgments, because your judgments are what keep the problems going. So really watch your judgments, and then support any movement. Don't be afraid of it. If you feel a shaking or a tingling, it's just your body wanting to move. And it's all over, like the social media now, people showing you TRE or something where you're kind of letting the body shake out. So we want to invite that, not be afraid of it. And then mindfulness and meditation, you know, the brain doesn't lock down after your 20s, which people were saying. It really is still flexible. It still can, you know, and what happens when you let yourself be in a mindful place is what happens is the parts of your brain start to communicate, and then it creates integration. And then we not only have the ability to have compassion for ourselves, but we can have compassion for others without losing ourselves. And it creates sort of a natural boundary. All right, I'm not going to do that. And then we get to grief. So, I guess, what I want to say is there's so much to say about grief. And I realize that I've said sort of things that I think are helpful to you and are, I think can kind of help you play with these ideas to bring more energy into your life and come sort of stand in life a little bit differently than you have, perhaps being depleted by things, but just finding presence or grounding yourself or working with your breath and kind of the way you're looking at things, and play with how you can look at it differently rather than sort of immediately go into fear. And what I will say about grief, which, we've all experienced, at this point, I don't know anyone who really hasn't sort of been touched by grief in so many different ways. And I guess I would love to come back and talk in more depth about it because it's such a huge topic. But one thing to know is that, and not everyone knows this, but all trauma it sets off the process of grief. But not all grief is traumatic. So there's beautiful ceremonies and gentle ways in which people exit. But in the times we're in, there's a lot more trauma because people are dying in hospitals without you being able to say goodbye to them. Other losses happen that don't even have to go with COVID, and you can't go to the funeral. So it's so much more complicated. So it is a really huge subject. And when you lean into grief, when you lean into the process, and I will say this, and then I'll finish, but that grief is something inside. It's a process that happens inside. Mourning is required to move grief. And it's the expression of our loss, or expression of our sadness. And it requires a witness. So those of you who think that you can grieve alone, you can't. You won't, you'll get stuck in grief. And so just like all emotions that need to move, so too does grief. And so find yourself and find those, make sure, you may be the witness for your clients, but maybe they need to have other people so they're not fully dependent on you. But someone who's not going to try to change how they feel, they're just sort of standing with them and being a witness to what they're experiencing without judgment.
What great material, Karen. This is totally my wheelhouse. This is how I work with people, very much around the nervous system and grounding and all of those places that you're talking about. And this is fabulous. I feel like I learned some things and took it in a bit differently. I love your warm way of holding this information and the people that you're obviously working with. So thank you for that. So if you had to pick the top couple of takeaways for today, Karen, what would you say there?
That emotions need to move. And so whatever you're feeling, an emotion lasts for 90 seconds to 2 minutes if you uninterrupted. So if you're feeling anger, if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling sad, whatever you're feeling, like let yourself feel it and let it pass. Because you're not going to stay like this forever unless you make it stay forever. Through judgment, through your thoughts, through obsessive thinking and circular thinking, And so you want to sort of relax the thought and like surrender to the feeling and let it pass. And so I think that's kind of what, that's what trauma wants. That's what stress wants. That's what grief wants. It just wants to move. And when it moves, it creates space, and the space just keeps growing, and you become more of a centered, solid person. I think it was Sonia Choquette that said the goal is to be a model of sanity. That's my goal.
I love that. Yeah, so, we need to be a model of sanity.
Yeah. So I think that would be sort of the nugget. And I guess breathe and ground. Breathe, watch your breath, because if you're feeling anxious, notice you're probably not breathing.
Yeah, the other thing, Karen, that is, it's not a recommendation that I always make, but I love consultation. I think consultation is fabulous. I have done it regularly over the course of my 30-some years of practice, and I'm always talking to people about cases and my reactions and what's happening in me, what happens in my body. And I'm suggesting this a lot more to people now, to therapists, even though we've been fully licensed and baked for a long time. it's still, especially now, I think it's really important for us to continue to talk about the work that we're doing and
Absolutely.
the impact on us, and to have places that are safe for us to do that.
Mhm.
So thank you all. Thank you, Karen, for being here. Thank you all for joining us. Happy holidays. Thanks for joining us.